Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to try to untangle a really complex and frankly disturbing situation.
Yeah, this one's heavy.
It is. We're going to be looking at what's happening to the Uyghurs in China.
Right.
We've got a ton of material to dig through reports from BBC News, The Telegraph, Vice News, Sky News, Warfronts, and a bunch of human rights
A
organizations.
lot of different perspectives.
Exactly. So let's jump right in and start by understanding the region itself, Xinjiang. Why is it so crucial to China?
Well, for starters, it's an economic powerhouse for China. I mean, it produces a huge chunk of the world's aluminum,
Didn't realize it was that much.
9%. And that's not all. It's also responsible for like a fifth of the world's cotton production.
Wow, that's a lot of cotton.
It is. And on top of that, it's just overflowing with natural resources that are absolutely essential for Chinese manufacturing and trade.
So you're talking about resources that are crucial for China's global economic ambitions.
Precisely. If they lose control of Xinjiang, it would send shockwaves through their entire economy.
So it's not just about the resources themselves, it's about the control.
Absolutely. It's about maintaining a grip on those supply chains and ensuring their economic engine keeps running.
Okay, so that explains why the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is so invested in keeping a tight hold on the region.
It's non-negotiable for them, and that helps explain their increasingly extreme measures to make sure it stays that way.
So how do the Uyghurs fit into this? I mean, they've called this region home for centuries.
Their relationship with the Chinese state has been anything but smooth. Let's just say that their history is marked by conflict reaching all the way back to the early 20th century.
I've read about calls for independence and clashes with the CCP throughout the 20th century.
Exactly. And then in the 1990s, the CCP started encouraging Han Chinese to resettle in Xinjiang.
The Telegraph and Warfront sources really highlighted how that resettlement policy just amplified the tension.
It was a powder keg waiting to explode. And unfortunately, it did lead to some very violent incidents.
And those incidents have been used to justify even harsher crackdowns.
Sadly, yeah, both sides have engaged in violence. The Telegraph actually profiled one Uyghur militant group, the Turkestan Islamic Party.
Right, they've openly vowed to fight for independence.
Exactly. And then there was the 2009 riot in Urumqi, Xinjiang's capital.
Over 140 people died in that riot. It was a turning point, for sure.
A tragic one. It really set the stage for the CCP's increasingly heavy-handed response.
So the situation has been escalating for decades, but how did the CCP initially respond to all this unrest?
Well, their response has evolved over time, becoming more and more restrictive. It started with the Strike Hard anti-terrorism campaign back in 1996.
Strike hard, it sounds intense.
It was. But 2014 marked a really dramatic turning point.
That's when Xi Jinping visited Xinjiang and issued his infamous absolutely no mercy directive. I remember reading about that in the Warfronts report.
That was a chilling declaration. And in hindsight, it really foreshadowed the policies that would unfold the mass detention, the surveillance.
The Xinjiang police files, analyzed by the BBC, offer a terrifying glimpse into the reality of that surveillance. I mean, facial recognition cameras, AI monitoring online activity, even GPS trackers on cars.
It's like something out of a dystopian novel.
The BBC reported that even the most mundane activities can land someone in detention, growing a beard, attending a religious lecture, even failing to pay a water bill on time.
It creates this suffocating atmosphere of suspicion where any action, no matter how small, can be interpreted as dissent. It's psychological warfare.
And that sense of paranoia is a powerful tool of control.
Absolutely. It keeps people in line through fear.
But it's not just about surveillance. The sheer scale of the detentions is what really shocked me.
Amnesty International estimates over 1 million Uyghurs have been detained against their will. This isn't just a few isolated incidents. It's systematic and widespread.
I remember China initially denied the existence of these camps. They claimed they were vocational education and training centers.
Right, vocational education. But reports from Sky News and the BBC paint a very different picture. They describe prison-like facilities with harrowing accounts from survivors.
Satellite imagery shows how rapidly these camps were constructed. They often repurposed existing structures like schools and factories.
It speaks to a very deliberate and calculated effort to detain a significant portion of the population.
And the impact on those inside is devastating. The BBC interviewed a woman who escaped, and her words were haunting. She simply said, "You can't think of anything beyond wishing you had a full stomach."
Wow. That says it all, really, doesn't it? The overcrowding, the lack of food, the forced labor. But it goes beyond even those basic deprivations.
There are reports of psychological manipulation, sexual abuse, systematic efforts to strip Uyghurs of their cultural identity.
It seems like the camps themselves are just one element of a much larger and much more sinister strategy.
And that's what we need to unpack next. What's really happening inside these so-called re-education camps? Yeah, it feels like these camps are just the tip of the iceberg. The reports suggest something much deeper and more disturbing is happening.
You're right, it seems like the camps are part of a larger strategy aimed at forced assimilation and ultimately the erasure of Uyghur culture.
It's like they're trying to mold them into Han Chinese society, stripping away their language, their faith, even their sense of identity.
Exactly. It's a multi-pronged attack, almost like a blueprint for cultural annihilation.
Amnesty International's report was just devastating. They detailed how every aspect of Uyghur life is being targeted from their religion to their families.
It's systematic and relentless.
For instance, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute estimates that over 16,000 mosques have been destroyed or damaged in Xinjiang since 2017.
16,000. That's two-thirds of the region's mosques.
It's a deliberate effort to sever their connection to their faith and their history.
And it goes beyond just physical structures. The BBC highlighted how there are bans on fasting during Ramadan and the severe restrictions on pilgrimages to Mecca.
It's like they're trying to erase any visible markers of Uyghur identity. Even personal choices like growing a beard or wearing a headscarf are seen as threats.
Absolutely. And they're aggressively pushing assimilation into Han Chinese culture. Remember those bilingual schools?
Yeah, the ones where they claim they're promoting cultural exchange.
Right. NPR's reporting revealed that Uyghur children are actually punished for speaking their native language.
And forced to learn Mandarin?
It's linguistic genocide. By controlling language, they control thought and expression.
It's ultimately about reshaping their very identity.
Precisely. And that indoctrination isn't confined to schools.
Human Rights Watch documented that detainees in the camps are forced to learn Mandarin and sing songs praising the state.
I read about that too. Forced patriotic displays.
Wolfronts even had a story about detainees being forced to answer exam questions with quotes about loving their motherland.
It's chilling. The psychological impact of this constant pressure to conform must be immense.
Imagine being forced to praise the very state that's oppressing you.
It's Orwellian, and they're using economic incentives to accelerate this cultural shift.
Radio Free Asia reported that Han Chinese settlers are being offered land jobs and financial incentives to move to Xinjiang.
It's a deliberate attempt to dilute the Uyghur population and further marginalize their culture.
They're even promoting intermarriage between Han Chinese and Uyghurs, offering rewards to mixed couples.
It's a long-term strategy to erase the Uyghur bloodline over generations.
And it's not just adults, they're targeting the next generation too.
The AP reported that children under 5 are being taken from their families.
And placed in state-run orphanages and boarding schools.
They're forced to speak Mandarin and indoctrinated with state propaganda.
The trauma inflicted on these families is unimaginable.
We need to talk about what's happening to Uyghur women.
The reports of forced sterilization and birth control are horrifying.
It's a blatant attempt to control their reproductive rights and suppress their population growth.
The AP uncovered that local governments were rewarded for reporting what they called illegal births.
It's pitting communities against each other, incentivizing betrayal.
And then there are the reports of sexual abuse and rape within the camps.
It's just horrific. One survivor, Tursunay Zuadin, bravely spoke to the BBC about the systematic abuse women face.
Her testimony was heartbreaking. She described it as unthinkable and unbearable.
It's a testament to the strength and resilience of the Uyghur people that they can even speak about these things.
But these acts are not just about control. They're about breaking their spirit, their families, their very essence.
Some sources suggest the horrors go even deeper.
I've read about concerns over forced organ harvesting.
The UN has raised concern about Uyghurs being subjected to blood tests and organ examinations without consent.
The China Tribunal, an independent body, concluded that organ harvesting from Uyghurs and other minorities is happening on a massive scale.
If true, this adds another layer of horror to the situation.
It's crucial to understand that these actions have consequences that reach far beyond the immediate suffering.
The minority rights group warns that the psychological scars of this persecution will last for generations.
We've seen this pattern in other historical examples of cultural genocide. The damage echoes through time.
It's a tragic loss not just for the Uyghur people, but for humanity as a whole.
And this is all happening while China actively works to control the narrative.
Their propaganda machine is incredibly effective. They've managed to convince many that this is all about combating terrorism and promoting economic development.
Vice News documented how they bring journalists from friendly nations on these carefully staged tours of Xinjiang.
Right, it's all smoke and mirrors. They present this sanitized version of reality where happy Uyghurs are singing and dancing, and there's no mention of the camps or the oppression.
But those who try to expose the truth face serious consequences.
Journalists are intimidated. Detained, expelled Uyghurs living abroad are afraid to speak out because they know it could endanger their families back home.
It creates this chilling effect, making it incredibly difficult to get accurate information out.
But we can't let them control the story. We have a responsibility to amplify the voices of the survivors and challenge this fabricated narrative.
Silence is complicity.
We need to keep asking questions, sharing information, and demanding accountability.
You're right, but what can we as individuals realistically do to make a difference? It feels overwhelming. I hear you. It's easy to feel powerless in the face of something so vast.
It is, but even small actions can contribute to a larger movement. We can't let that feeling paralyze us.
Right. So we've taken the first step, we've informed ourselves. But where do we go from here? What can we actually do?
Well, first and foremost, we need to spread the word. Talk to your friends and family, share information online, write to your elected officials. The more people who know, the harder it is for China to operate in the shadows.
So it's about applying pressure from all sides.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of your wallet. Supporting businesses that are committed to ethical sourcing, that are opposed to forced labor, sends a message.
What about organizations working directly with the Uyghurs?
There are some incredible groups out there doing really important work. The Uyghur Human Rights Project, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the World Uyghur Congress. These are all organizations that need our support.
Donations can make a difference.
Absolutely. Even small donations can add up and have a real impact on the ground.
You mentioned earlier that China has pressured countries like Pakistan to deport Uyghur refugees. What can we do to help those seeking asylum?
Reach out to your local refugee resettlement agencies. They need volunteers, they need resources, and advocate for policies that welcome refugees. It's about extending a hand to those who have lost everything.
It's just heartbreaking to think that even escaping persecution doesn't guarantee safety. This really underscores the need for global action and solidarity.
And it's important to remember this isn't just about the Uyghurs. It's about standing up for human rights everywhere. When we tolerate injustice in one part of the world, it emboldens those who seek to oppress others.
It's a slippery slope.
It is silence in the face of these atrocities makes us complicit.
You're right, apathy is not an option. We have to speak out. The Uyghurs are showing incredible resilience in the face of unimaginable suffering. We owe it to them to fight alongside them.
Absolutely. And remember, throughout history, movements for justice have succeeded against all odds. Change is possible. The Uyghur people deserve our unwavering support, our voices, and our commitment to their cause.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with a profound sense of responsibility. This isn't just some distant problem. It's a reflection of our world, a test of our values, a call to action.
We can all make a difference. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope you'll continue to learn, speak out, and act in support of the Uyghur people. Their fight is our fight.
It is. We can't let this fade from the headlines. We have to keep the pressure on, keep raising awareness, keep demanding action.
And we will. Thanks for listening, everyone.